Welcome to everyone. Good morning. Welcome to the event where we're going to touch upon the topic why we can't achieve the SDGs without including young people, hosted by Development Goals Forum. My name is Danat Tekie and I work in Young Sustainable Impact, and I will be your moderator today. And with us, we have a great lot of people that I'm looking forward to introduce. The first one is Nassima Dzair, CEO and founder of Interbridge Academy. Pablo Barrera Lopez, EVP Strategy and Communications, Yara International, and Embla Regine Mathisen, leader of Changemaker and LNU's Youth Delegate for Sustainable Development. Very welcome, warm welcome. I'll start with the first conversation and just go straight to it. Change comes in many ways, and all of you guys are working to contribute to that in your different ways. So start off by telling us more about yourselves, what you do, and how you got there. I guess we can start with Embla.
Yeah, well, I work as the leader or president of Changemaker Norway, which is a youth organization that focuses on international development through campaign work and different activities to engage youth in what the world is up against and how we can change it. So that's what I do mostly. And well, I got there as an activist. I started in Changemaker when I was 15 years old. And I've been an activist for sustainable development for the last 8 years. And then I just ended up being the leader after a while. Yeah, I guess that's it. Other than that, I'm 23 years old and I'm from Pennsylvania, if that matters.
Nice, thank you. We can go over to Nassima.
So I'm, like you said, Danat, the CEO of Interbridge, which is a startup that focuses on one hand, Generation Z, which for us are then teenagers between 12 and 18. And we offer them a leadership academy to develop their skills and their voice. But most importantly, it's also to give them a platform where this voice actually matters. And that's why, on the other hand, we also work with the public and the private sector, where the youth can come and give their insight and participate in workshops that have to do with innovation, sustainability, diversity. And it's also in that way for the actual businesses of today to understand what the customer of tomorrow actually want and need, and be able to change in advance, and to understand also at a leadership level, at an HR level, what the wants and needs of the young people are. But it's also to give the young people an actual possibility of influence, which is very important. And how I got there, I have to say, like Embla, I've always been very engaged. So already as a student, I was part of different organizations and did activism for human rights and for sustainable development that at that time was called SDGs. That's how older I am, but I'm 35 and I'm from Oslo. And I would say that this all came about from a need to innovate, to create something that is in between sectors and that builds bridges between people and disciplines and generations.
Nice, thank you. And Pablo? You're muted.
Sorry about that, new beginner mistake, forgot to unmute. So good morning, everybody. My name is Pablo Barrera, and I'm really happy to be here this morning together with you. I work in Yara. Yara is a fertilizer company. We are the most international fertilizer company. We have a Norwegian heritage, and in Yara, I'm responsible for strategy and business development, communication, and procurement. So I sit in the corporate management and run those areas. I came to Yara through my consulting background. So I started in Yara 6 years ago, working as a project manager in the strategy department, being an internal consultant, you could say. And then I moved out. I headed our operations in Chile. I was country manager there, and was then asked to return to sit in corporate management. And I think my background is probably similar to many on the line and my panelists. I've always been engaged in different types of community work, trying to use my skills to do something for the greater good. I early identified myself as being a structured person, being able to work in big companies, achieve change from within. So I found my path to be in large corporate, working in those big structures to make positive change. And in Yara, I'm able to do that. The world, as you know, has more than 800 million people that go hungry to bed every day. And in Yara, we work to end hunger. We help feed between 250 and 300 million people every year. And I hope that that number will triple over the next years.
Nice, thank you. And I think it definitely will. I was actually reading a report on agriculture yesterday with talking about the growth and how it's doubling and tripling in a very short amount of time. So it's probably going to be very interesting. And I think in the different types of work that you guys have been doing, could you guys touch a bit upon what the challenges or a challenge that you've struggled with or come upon related to your work? Nassima, do you maybe want to start?
Yes. Well, you know, when you work towards change and creating change, you do face challenges because there is a status quo and you arrive with a different approach to what the status quo is, how it is operating. So at some points there might be resistance. Now, the things we are talking about, our future, the generation growing up, the next generation, sustainable development, there is a consensus most often on the positivity of these elements. So I have never met someone that tells me this is irrelevant. However, to get people to get from words and the consensus of how important and great this is to actual implementation and action has at some points stagnated or doesn't go as fast as perhaps I would want it. But then this is also the great aspect of our generation and the one coming after us, is that we feel that we lack time and we are somewhat impatient and we're expecting a faster pace in change than maybe what the public and the private sector are able to create sometimes. So the hard lesson has had to be patience. But then when that comes and you find the right partners and you do find change agents within corporations or within the public sector, then it's really nice. So for example, having Pablo on board that speaks of what he does within his corporation, it's people like this and finding them and creating the right links that actually creates the change.
Nice. I guess that's a perfect segue over to you then, Pablo. What are some of the challenges or a challenge that you struggle with related to your work?
I very much identify myself with what Nassima is saying. Also, in a big company, I think it's often challenging to get people on board to create that sense of urgency, because it's big structures. Things take time. You need to involve a lot of people. So it can sometimes feel like things are moving very slow, even for me with the fortunate position I have. So I echo that, but I would also maybe add one more, and that is prioritization. So we get flooded, but we get a lot of good ideas, good projects. We have also a lot of things we want to do internally, and to prioritize in the among all these great initiatives that by themselves are really, really good, but you can't really do everything. So trying to identify where it is that we can have the biggest impact and really build on that is something we put a lot of effort in daily, I would say, because a big company like ours, we could do many things, and we could probably do them quite well, but we want to dedicate ourselves to where we have a unique competitive advantage, where we bring something to the table that nobody else can do, and to identify those areas and really drive those forward to have the biggest possible impact. That is what I would say is our biggest challenge at the moment.
Super interesting. I think it's really important to get the perspective of what, what are, because very rarely for people that is on the other side that are maybe the smaller actor, the smaller actors such as us with being the startups or being the smaller company, we don't know what's going on inside that big company. And so when we come with something that seems interested and seems that there's a clear synergy, it's quite frustrating when you don't understand, what are the barriers, and, this is a clear fit. So I think it's really important and really good to get your perspective here to really see, what's going on the other side. Embla, do you want to come in with some of the challenges that you've encountered?
Well, honestly, I think the biggest challenge for me, I'm responsible for a huge amount of young activists and changemaker, and the most frustrating thing and like the actual biggest problem is usually adults. Honestly, not giving us, one thing is space and the opportunity to say what we mean and actually listen, not just have us at the table. That happens. I've been invited to meetings just to listen, which is really frustrating. But the hardest part, the single hardest part of my job was when we started organizing the school strikes in Norway. I had so many activists being afraid because they got horrible messages. One of my activists, like a young activist, some of them were also under 18, so they were legitimate children. They got emails, and one got a post to their parents' home threatening them, and that scares people, So I think the debate climate and the comment section on Facebook is something that's probably the biggest struggle for me, because I think that's what stops a lot of people to actively engage in the amount that they actually want to and say their opinions loud enough, especially for women. I think it's 2 years ago now that Amnesty released a report on young females in politics and females in general, and the amount of criticism they get. And that is definitely something that also happens to children and people in politics, but are not engaged in the party politics. Yeah.
Nice. I think it's definitely a good highlight. And I just want to say that I just realized it's really nice to have, as we just got started with, like, change comes in many ways. And I think in the way that we have you guys presented here, you also show the different ways you can contribute to working with sustainability in terms of activism, in terms of working in businesses and being a force there, working with educating, empowering young people to show the diversity in with, it's not only through activism that you can play an impact or have a role. So I think that's really inspiring. We're going to come back to that towards the end. And I think I just want to touch upon and come into today's topic with starting a bit broad, if you guys can be brief, because this is a huge question with what does sustainability and a sustainable future means to you, because everyone has different explanations. So yeah, feel free, anyone can start. Pablo.
It's a huge question, and I'm looking at Embla now, because in her background she has all the SDGs. So you could basically take all of them and go one by one, and say that each of them define a sustainable future. So if I'm to zoom in maybe on what I'm really passionate about and what I spend most of my time on, I would say that for me a sustainable future means that we end hunger, and we do it in a way where we can sustain the population within the planetary boundaries. I think that is, for me, what really motivates me and drives me, is to be able to find a way to feed more people in a more sustainable way with healthier food. I think that is where my passion lies, and where I'm fortunate enough to be able to influence through the company I work for. But I always think, or I always find it difficult to just single out one thing, but you asked me to be brief, because if I look at the other dimensions, like gender equality, for example, I'm a big believer in diversity and have been working hard to push that agenda within my own company and in my teams. You have climate action as another SDG, etc. So there are many really, really good ones, but if I had to zoom in, I would zoom in on hunger.
Great, thanks. Embla, do you want to come in here?
Yeah, I think obviously I like all the sustainable development goals, but a sustainable future is way beyond 2030 as well, and I think that's important to recognize. But I think a sustainable future is it's a place that's where everybody has what they need, and everybody gets everyone has what they need in every country, and nobody necessarily takes that much more than that. But we have an equal society with a lot of equity instead of equality, I guess. And I think that's the most important part, both for people and for humans. No, that's the same thing, both for people and the planet, and also for animals and biodiversity, that the planet also has what it needs, you know, and that I have what I need, and that you guys have what you need, and that developing countries have the same ability to get development as well, in the same rate that as more the Western countries have, because you know, Western countries have taken advantage of like all of the other countries for centuries, and I think it's time that stops and that we truly look at, is this part of like Western development necessary? Do we need more skyscrapers or bigger houses, or do people need their private yachts? Probably not, you know, people need food. And I think that's also important to recognize, that we need also less inequality within countries as well, because we don't need billionaires, you know, trillionaires. Those doesn't necessarily do that much for a country. You can never earn that much amount of money just on actually working. You make that amount of money based on taking advantage of either the planet or the economy or people, you know. And getting rid of that is also important in talking about sustainable development. So there's a lot of policy and structural change that I think needs to be addressed when we talk about sustainability.
Definitely. Nassima?
So I agree with the fact that we need to look beyond 2030 when we speak of a sustainable future. And I would summarize it, because the way the 17 goals are done is that they're not separate. They're all interconnected, and you actually cannot have one without the other on some level. So the importance of seeing it from a more general perspective and to really see how interdependent they are. And that would bring me to say that what I visualize is how to have people have the highest quality of life. How can we develop human potential and give access to not only the most basic human rights, and within human rights also include access to food and access to health, but to create a space where the humans on this planet are thriving within a planet that is thriving, which means then including climate and biodiversity and so on. So for me, I think I found a way of putting it for myself where I say that I'm passionate for the highest quality of life for human beings.
Great. And I think it's become such, like, it's not new when we talk about sustainability, even though it seems like it. And it's become this buzzword, and people tend to almost say like, oh, but yeah, no, sustainability is not that important for me. But it's really about the society you live in, and it affects you in every section of life. So I think it's important sort of break down the word and actually make people understand what this is about, because if everyone understands what they could do to contribute to sustainable impact in their daily lives and the choices they make, to be aware, then we have a very strong force. But it is not in the hands of the few that are engaged to make the whole world sustainable, to drive this. In order to do that, we need to have everyone on board. And so I guess that also goes back with not leaving anyone behind. And I think that's a perfect segue into today's topic, with why we can't achieve a sustainable future, sustainability, without including young people. In very many countries today, young people are over 30 to 50% of the population. The populations are below 30 years old. And so that is not highlighted in the way that young people are included into decision-making processes that's going to have an impact for the life that we're going to continue to carry. And so I guess I wanted to just start with, why can we not achieve the SDGs without young people? And also to add to that, in your perspective, what are the barriers and the challenges when it comes to including young people? If there are any, what are they? Pablo?
Yeah, I think that why we need young people. We touched on it a bit earlier, where I often have a lot of positive experience with discussing with young, quote unquote, people. I see myself as quite young still. I'm 34. I think our generation has a bigger sense of a burning platform. So actually, you, Danat, in 2018, you participated in the management summit of Yara, where all our top 200 leaders from all over the world were gathered. And you said on stage that we're the first generation to suffer the consequences of climate change, and probably the last one that can do anything about it. And I actually remember that to this day, what you said in September 2018. And that for me was one of those aha moments that I've had throughout the last years, which was triggered by a young and passionate person. So I think that passion, the burning platform, the drive that the young people bring to this is important, because many of these challenges are extremely complex. They're much more complex than what we've seen in other industries, etc. This is multi-sectoral issues. You need to look at value chains end to end. You need competitors to be able to collaborate. You need public and private sector partnerships. So the complexity of the problems we're looking at is much greater, as I see it. And then you need that bright mind with a lot of passion and energy that can come in and challenge established structures. And there, I think young people have an edge, in addition to the fact that they feel a much stronger ownership to the problems than the older generations do, as I see it. I think you asked also about the challenges, if I see any challenges. Maybe one challenge, and it can seem a bit counterintuitive, is patience. So I think that the drive and the passion is important to channel it in a way, and not lose faith in the fact that companies, and now I'm talking a bit like company where I work in, we have a positive desire to change and to contribute to making things better, more sustainable. However, it can sometimes take time in big structures. So being patient and not giving up is something that I would encourage the younger generation to do. Not necessarily saying it's a challenge, but more as an encouragement that don't give up on us, even though it can sometimes take a bit of time.
Yeah, I think definitely it's important. And I think very often people tend to look at, when it comes to the word of including young people, that it's about more pushing out the more established structure, which it's not, because it's really about using youth as a driving force and looking at young people as a critical stakeholder that has something to contribute with to the table, while working together with the established that has the experience. And I really believe that when they two actually work together, because you have that naivety and passion that questions the why, and asks maybe why one more time than what the other person does. And when they work together, I really think that that's when we can figure out and work around these complex situations. And so in YSI, that's a lot what we're trying to do with bridging the youth and the established, and which is also done with working with Yara. Nassima, do you have any thoughts on this?
I absolutely agree with you, because this is where our work actually has a lot of synergy, only we target a younger group, again, that is 12 to 18. While I understand that you also have students. And it is about these generational meetings. It is about the dialogue. It is about creating the bridges, because if not, like what Embla said in the beginning, society is really polarized at the moment. And the more we speak about these topics, and with the social media and the distance and the threats and the lack of dialogue, it's very simple. So we need to bring to the table the different voices and to create a climate for the dialogue so that it is constructive. Because I guess when we say that the voice of youth is important, and it only has the role of the ones that are going to alert and be angry and strike and so on, it actually is just a beginning. That is the awareness part that is lacking in a lot of the structures. What I believe in is to also simplify the different steps into action. And this is where we work with our young people a lot. It is on several levels. So what can you do as an individual? You have the power of being a customer, and you can choose how you use your money. You have the power of voting, and you also have just the fact that you influence your relations and what you have around you. So it's just this drop in a water that seems infinite, but that actually creates ripple effects. And then, like Embla spoke about, there is the structural aspect where it is the political decisions. When it comes to companies, it is about budgets. And this is where things take time. It's who decides what and where does the money and the focus go. And often it's follow the money, because if the money goes to the focus, the change will come. As long as the money is not put where the words are, it's all talk. And so creating, conference after conference, nicely small sponsor budget to look nice, it's not enough. And this is where the young voices are a real challenge. And one last aspect that I need to highlight is that the generation growing up now, and even the ones after us even more, are really having statistics that are alarming when it comes to the fear for the future and the fear for climate. And it's real. So for example, adults will say, yes, we feel it, we see the temperature rising, but working with young adolescents, I see that some of them are actually truly fearful in a way that even I am not, and I have to be honest about it. And to see that it affects their daily life, it affects their mental health. They are not certain of what is coming. They're not sure if they will study something and that diploma will actually lead to a job. To not know anything about tomorrow. And then again, we're in a time of pandemic, so they have seen that the planet can be shaken in a way that maybe we haven't known before, are aspects that makes this generation unique and where we absolutely need to take their input seriously.
Embla?
Well, I think this is a hard question. I'm in the brief. If you're 22 years old today, I'm 23. So I think in regards to sustainable development and sustainable future, I think it's also important to recognize that it is the young people that have to be the people that decide what the sustainable future is. Adult people cannot be the ones deciding what's sustainable and what's not sustainable, because they're not going to live with that future, And as Nassima said, the actions where the money's at, and that's a huge problem. And also it's a huge problem that not enough young people are in not in leadership positions, but also in political decision-making positions. And that affects how the whole of society is being focused and is developing. And I think it's developing in a way that's very like status quo, do as we've always done, just improve like small bits here and there, throw some conferences, show some money, which is just like a minuscule part of the budget, you know. And they also, I've been a part of conferences where the government ends up pledging the same amount of money 3 times, you know, and they still haven't delivered on the money. Just so it's frustrating. That's frustrating. But I think, as Pablo said, also patience is a big part of it. And when I'm in charge of a lot of young people, you know, that's very passionate, very fearful for their future, but also very engaged and somewhat positive as well, because when you're in the community where everyone is contributing and trying to make the world better, you get a huge feeling of hope. It's beautiful, you know, and people would do everything. They work so hard. And so one of the things that I'm really focused on teaching to my activists are also sustainable activism. And not sustainable as like, don't buy plastic when you go to seminar, but sustainable in a personal way. Because I want us all to be activists when we're 70 as well, because we're probably gonna need it. We're not gonna fix this in like 20 years and then it's all good job, pat ourselves on the shoulder. This is a continuous process, and the focus is gonna shift as well. There's gonna be new young generations, and I'm gonna end up not recognizing all of their beliefs, but we have to roll with it. I think we have to be more radical in the ways that we see change, not just try to be a bit more sustainable within the box. We have to be like way outside the box and draw outside the lines and figure out new ways to run companies and to run schools and to be humans in society and relate to other people and stuff. I think that's important in the future. And I think one of the biggest problem sometimes it's being invited, but it's probably the debate and making sure that people also see the benefits that they're creating, that there is progress. I work a lot with this right now in our project called Världens bästa nyheter, which is showcasing a lot of positive things that are happening in regards to sustainable development. And there's reports on this, and young people especially are systematically wrongfully informed about the status of the world. And how does that impact us and our decision making? If I don't see it works out, if I don't see that it helps what I do, if I don't see that my actions matter as an individual, then I probably won't continue with it. And if everybody thinks like that, if nobody wants to cut down on their flights, if nobody thinks that voting for the more sustainable party is worth it, nobody's gonna do it. We have to like sacrifice some parts, but in a society where it's more polarized, both in the debates, but also political views and stuff are more polarized, and I think that's also dividing society. And I think that's very, very harmful, because we need a strong society to be able to fulfill these goals, and mostly led by young people, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's a delicate balance, and I think it's important to, you know, talking about equity, talking about not only focusing on one part of society, but trying to include all parts, and that it's not about having the one or the other, but it's about looking at it holistically and how it could work together, because that's when we can draw the best out of it. And I think that leads me on to the question in terms of, you know, what can be done then to reduce the gap between youth, decision makers, actors within public and private sector when working towards sustainable development. And I want you guys to be very concrete, and how can young people, in your perspective, be included in a better way? Yeah. Pablo, do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start, and I thought I would build a bit on what Embla said, because I agree that we need to have more young people at the table, in all tables. So in private companies, in the governments, and in the NGOs. But I also think your point is important, Danat, that there is a balance, right? And if I just draw on my own personal experience, when I started to work in Yara 6 years ago, I entered into the strategy team, and I was at that time 29, and I was working on a project with a person which had worked in the company for almost 40 years. So there was quite a lot of distance between us age-wise, but working with a person that had so much experience together was really, really valuable. And I think together we managed to bring new perspectives and think about new solutions in a way that I wouldn't have been able to do if I had worked only with newcomers like myself, and that he wouldn't do if he had only worked with much more experienced people than me. So I think there is power in that combination between the young, which is risk-taking, challenges the status quo, has a lot of passion, feels really the burning platform, and maybe the more experienced generation that I would say is also open-minded. Of course, you have a lot of variation there also. So I think we need to help also the older generations expand their horizons, bring facts to the table, etc. So we need to work with them in a different way than what we do with people that already buy into the message. But to create structures where you get that combination, I think is important, and that for me is important across all areas, public, private, you name it. So that is something that I'm focused on in how we work in my company, is how do we bring that diversity to the table to get things happening. I think for me that's probably where I see a specific need for action, which I also can take within the area I work in, which is a private company where I need to work through those structures. And then I think also we as private companies need to think much more stakeholder capitalism and think beyond just our bottom line. I think many companies are doing so. More and more, I see good examples of companies thinking beyond just the profit dimension. But there, I also expect that we will see greater demands from the public in general, but also from the regulatory bodies on how do you also contribute beyond. And there's a lot of exciting stuff happening in the EU, and we also see standards arising in different industries where we get push from the outside to also change. And I think a lot of that is driven by this burning platform, which I think the youth has been good in creating. But to summarize, I think it's that combination. We need to get the diversity around the table to address these issues.
And I think, yeah, great. And I have a follow-up question that's actually before you have to leave in a bit. That's asked by some of the viewers, which is, can Pablo comment on that, since you're working in Yara, on how Yara is working to involve and include young people? Are there any specific strategies that Yara is focusing on other than internships and organizing events towards students and young professionals?
Yeah. I will be brief and name a few. So if you take in a Norwegian context, apart from what was mentioned, internships, etc., we've had a collaboration with YSI a while back, which I think was very good. We've also had a collaboration with one of the bydeler here in Oslo on a project with urban farming. At the more global arena, we have every year agripreneur competition, so an agriculture entrepreneur competition in Africa, where we have hundreds and hundreds of entrepreneurs which compete for a prize that we hand out together with some of our partners. And we founded that last year together with African businessman Scribe Masiva. And it's hosted out of AGRA, Green Revolution for Africa Alliance. And so that is one specific example where we have hundreds of young entrepreneurs working to every day improve the situation for them in Africa, where we, through the platform we have, can help them scale. We can give them an arena to take their ideas out into the world. And then maybe lastly, a concrete example I would like to mention is that we do a lot of work within digital tools and digital farming, and many of the farmers we address with these are quite young. It's the new generation of farmers. So we also work with, at the global scale, young farmers to drive change in agricultural practices. So we do things on different levels, some very close to business and some a bit further apart. And some of the things with a more recruiting and HR angle.
I just want to challenge you a bit on what you said in terms of a lot of the different initiatives that you mentioned are things that Yara are doing with the external environment, in terms of how you're including the external environments that might be young people towards Yara as a company, but looking inwards and then out, do you know, or are you guys working with on the same level that we've had focus on including young people, now women into companies, and it's been part of the strategies, and you report on that actually every year in terms of the level and percentage of women represented when we're going back to diversity. But very often, especially in Norway, the diversity conversation has been very kept to gender and not, for example, other parameters as age or disability level. And so I just wanted to challenge you a bit on, how you guys are working internally to get more young people represented in the workforce that you have today. Because I guess, I don't know, an assumption might be that it's the level of young people, or the amount of young people in different levels are not maybe in a level that's high enough.
Yeah, I think it's a good challenge, and for me, diversity is beyond the gender. I think there's been a very good push on gender, which was needed, and we will continue to push on that. We still have a way to go, but it's much more. It's ethnicity, as you say, disability, it's sexual orientation, so many things, age. What we concretely do on that is one, I think, create awareness. So when I came into corporate management, I need to think now, I was 33. And when I was appointed country manager for Chile, I was 30. So I was probably the youngest country manager we've ever had. And I am the youngest member of corporate management we've ever had. And that's been a concrete action taken by the CFO, where he wants to foster younger talents at all levels. So he himself became a CEO in Yara at a very young age compared to our 100-year history. He was just above 40, and he has really worked systematically to put focus on that. So if I look into my own organization and my own management team, I have representatives there. 4 out of 3 or 4 out of 8 are below the age of 40. If I look at the levels below that, we have a lot of people in their 30s, beginning 30s. So we don't have a specific program in place, but we have created awareness through the CEO, and we measure it and push our leaders to work for getting more young people into different levels of the company. We don't have a specific program. I'm not sure I would be a firm believer in that. I think much more in awareness and in challenging our leaders, and in showing that it can be done, and that we have had success when we put young people in key positions.
Yeah, and I think you're a great example of that, as being the youngest one in that management position. And I think it's going back into sort of in the essence of what you're saying, it's really important to have those specific leaders that push this through. And that was the same for us. And I think Yara, in terms of how I also got into working with Yara, was through starting with the CEO that pushed us in and took us in. So we need much more of those leaders that actually creates those success stories and takes those initiatives, so that it also comes in. And so, by the way, just let me know when you have to go. so that we can thank you
I
all for
unfortunately have to leave now. I'm very sorry about that, but I had to go for business travel on Friday, and I now need to have my last corona test before I'm allowed out of quarantine. So
Thank you so much for having a great talk with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, and lots of luck. You do a lot of important work, so I hope we can work together also in the future.
See you. Bye bye.
See you. Bye.
All right, I can then start with sort of on the bigger picture with or going back to the initial question that I had. What are your thoughts, Nassima and Embla, on what can be done specifically and how can young people be included in a better way? Nassima?
Yeah, I want to touch upon certain things that Pablo said because he came from a corporate perspective, and I do agree with him on the point that has to do with balance. So there's one word that hasn't been used, but we need to say it when it comes to the bottom lines. He spoke about profit. There has been different aspects when it comes to that, but I think moving in the corporate sector to understanding the triple bottom line that is about, of course, profit, because it's a driving force within, and people and planet, and just creating that awareness first, and then having them hopefully move towards actually changing their business plans, changing their practices towards including all those elements is really important. And what I believe is bringing in young people as an equal dialogue partner in that process, because the passion and the hope that exists within youth is absolutely important in those elements. But the reason why the work we do in Interbridge is important before the dialogue meetings happen is that we also work on the youth understanding or creating understanding for the older generation and giving them the tools to communicate their points in a really good manner, because that is the distance that exists between generation. If you just take the aspect of a child and their parents, and you see the generational gap and how in the teenage it always becomes a conflict, it's how do we create the tools to not make it about being a conflict, but to create the solutions. And sometimes having a translation of the different languages used is important. And creating also set intentions that we're moving towards the same thing. We actually want the same things. And this is where these elements of facilitating, like we do in Interbridge, like you do in YSI, that with the activism that you create within Changemakers are so important, is to kind of prep both sides to go towards the same direction. So I think for me, this is the most important part of creating the space for the youth, because it's not going to create itself by itself, even if there is a consensus that the voice is important. And that is also a bit on us, on what do we bring to the table and how do we communicate our solutions. And then one last point is that I've always been very passionate about change, but I've also seen that this point of you just need to be patient is true, because it's taken me a lot longer than I thought when I first started. But then there are other elements that can be put into place to create more action. And so understanding the ecosystems, like for example, the ecosystem of the private sector, and understanding their driving forces and the elements that they need to report on, that they are measuring, that they actually also are not just concept, but real numbers, are really important to drive the force of change to go faster. So with the SDGs, the fact that they need to report on them, and the structures have created around, the political structures have created a push, gives more space for young people to push the agenda as well. And as a startup, we've had to develop certain indicators to measure change, because if you only speak of change as a concept, that is not always well met and not something that you can always implement. So always to concretize the change and show measures of what has changed within the collaboration between these young people and the public sector. What are the results on the other side, and how can you measure them? And the same with the private sector, and to include some elements of the measuring on their terms is also really interesting, that it's actually something they can, okay, so they're profit driven. How can you have more profit by changing, for example, what you're selling to become a product that is good for the people and good for the planet? So elements like this, where it is needed to kind of meet them on it.
I think that's definitely really, really to the point. And I think I just want to emphasize the point of the language we use to communicate when it comes to this level of patience that they say that we need to have. Because if you understand the system, whether it's private or public, if you understand the structures that these decision makers work within, those are the structures that they have to accommodate to at the end of the day. Even though they really want, even though I really want to work with Changemaker and I'm a department in the government, I still at the end of the day have to adhere to the structures that I have to report on. And so if you can actually then understand that structure that that person works within, what do they have to report on? What are their strategies? What is that get measured? All of those things, you can actually then formulate your solution or the initiative or whatever it is towards that language. Meaning that, if I'm Changemaker and I'm talking to Yara, I shouldn't use the same language as if I'm talking to an environmental organization, for example, because we come from two different backgrounds. And so for me, if I'm a business person, I look into profit, I look into results, KPIs, all of that. And so if you then come to me and say, oh, your profit will go down next year because of this, then I'm going to be, the urgency is going to come because it will affect my work. And so it's about understanding that language aspect and how we communicate and changing that depending on the person we're talking to or the system. And I think that's really important to emphasize. So that's a good point, Nassima. Embla, what are your thoughts on what can be done to reduce the gap and how can young people be included in a better way?
Well, I think I agree mostly with what Nassima and Pablo said. And obviously I'm also a big part that it has to be balanced in the workforce and stuff. But I think the premise, like what the sustainable future is, that premise must be delivered by young people, because those are the people that are going to live with the consequences. And if their primary focus or primary focus, I guess, changes, we also have to be adaptable to change what we're working towards. If like a whole young generation starts to shift what's important to them, and I think that's what's changing right now, and that the older generation isn't necessarily following because they don't see sustainability in the same way. That sustainability just means that it's going to work out. It's a word you can use on anything. I use it when I talk about activism. That's also how we control my organization's economy. That has to be sustainable. Maybe your work hours have to be sustainable. Everything has to be sustainable, but that's not what these goals are about. These are about development and about planetary boundaries and about people, not necessarily about, profit and exceeding wealth. And so much of our current system is based on that. And those doesn't necessarily go great together. So we have to be switching up our focus a bit. And I think getting young people into positions of political power is the most important thing you can do. So many of the things that I think that the private sector has to do, and there's a lot of great companies already doing good stuff. I'm not like a negative. I care. Like I think that the private sector is important, and a lot of people do great work. There's also some structures there that are in the bottom line unhelpful for these goals in a lot of companies. And I think the way to address that is through political action and through regulations and through good laws. Like right now we have, or it's coming, very important law. It's a human rights law for the private sector. Changemaker works so much with this, and there is a law that might be coming, and that law will mandate all Norwegian bigger companies to follow the United Nations guiding principles on sustainable work and how they impact the planet and the humans that are helping produce their items. And I think stuff like that is so important. I think that's the most important thing you can do. And laws like that, I'm pretty sure would pass if more young people were in charge. So the biggest thing I do to help that is obviously using all the time I have in a day to try to engage more people politically, and to see that if they get together and try to organize, we can really achieve a lot of things. That's what, you know, the union movements have also really effectively shown us, that if you're a small person up against like the big boss, you're not gonna get done stuff alone. But if you gather all the employees, you can get change. And that's the same thing with society. But there's also a driving force right now that a lot more people are like individual activists, and they care and they're engaged, but they're not necessarily organized. And I try to work so that more and more people get organized and just support organizations that they believe in, because I think that's one of the most important things we can do right now, to really gather and stick together for what we believe in. And maybe that sometimes has to have to budge on some of your principles. That's what you do when you pick a political party. But I think if there's just one thing you disagree with in an organization, you just have to overlook it for the bigger picture. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think we have a minute left in respect of time, and I just want to mention one thing in terms of, you know, we have to continue to do the work that all of our organizations are doing, and engage more people and engage more young people, because young people are not a homogeneous group. There are lots of young people that are not engaged, that doesn't care, are not aware. And the minority, I would say rather, is the ones that are engaged. Very often we look like we're many when we meet up, but then when we split up, it's, you know, one person there and one person at the school, one person that often feels lonely and is not represented well enough. So young people we have to come even stronger and have to focus on including and engaging even more. And there's one last question to you from Bianca. Embla, can Embla tell us what kind of help young people, are getting from public sector actors?
So the first thing is money, honestly. So we get funding for every member that we have that's defined as a young person, which is under 26, but we include people up to 30. So we get money to exist, but there's also a lot of criteria you have to meet. So that's the one thing, but there's been a great increased interest in trying to be good at inclusion. Not necessarily every department is, especially maybe in like smaller municipalities and stuff. It's really like it's really dependent on specific people, because they have smaller secretariats. But we get invited to a lot of meetings, which is really great. The politician that I meet the most in my job is the Minister of International Development, which wouldn't necessarily be that way if they didn't genuinely care about trying to make it better. And honestly, sometimes they don't do it great. I've been invited to meetings with them, haven't been able to talk, made us just be seen sometimes. But I also tell them, that's the first meeting I had with the current Minister of Development. He invited this meeting. We didn't get to talk. We just had to sit there for an hour or two, listen to like Meteorologisk Institute talk about how sustainable development was important to them. And I wrote a piece in the newspaper about that we young people just had to sit on the bench and listen to the adults talk. And I think that really changed his mind as well. So he's really good at including us. So yeah, meetings and money, it's the biggest thing. But it's also under pressure a lot of the times. You know, there's been one of the things that finances changemakers work is NORAD's money, informational support money, I guess. And that's the single like thing that a lot of politicians are always trying to cut, because they don't necessarily see the value of the money. But I think we get so much change and so much activities done for those few million kroners, you know. So I'm hoping that more and more politicians and adults will see that and see the benefits that we do both for the world, but also for like society and for young people not necessarily feeling included in you know, activities like sports or dance, which sometimes are the only two options you have. So we also create, you know, this feeling of togetherness, which is also really important for young people. Even though, like, doesn't matter what you work on together, as long as you work on something together, that's great as well.
I have to cut
That
you
a good
there.
enough answer? Yeah.
Yeah. Perfect. Then I think we're going to round this off. I want to say a big thank you to Embla, Nassima, and also Pablo that was here earlier for your contributions and insights. And I think this has been a really great talk and also diverse talk, which with different perspectives represented, which also shows that, you know, we have to, with going back to what everyone has said, you know, it starts with dialogue and bridging these different perspectives and stakeholders from different contexts together. And so thank you so much for your time, and for everyone that's listened in and tuned in, feel free to follow up with any of these organizations. You'll find it on the event description, and have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Bye.
Bye-bye.